Although dark academia as a style and aesthetic is not exactly a trending topic right now, I argue that dark academia is actually a timeless style. Dark academia is not going anywhere, and I actually think dark academia is a great gateway to actually darker aesthetics, and that dark academia has a very important place when it comes to dark aesthetics as an umbrella term in general. I also started a series talking about if you are at a loss for finding inspiration and you want to aim for a dark style, aim to dress like a vampire, a witch, a siren, a haunted doll, or a fairy. Dark academia actually can be implemented into either one of these 5 muses, which I will discuss towards the end of the video. Okay, first and foremost, before I argue why is dark academia a timeless style, what is dark academia? First and foremost, it is a literary aesthetic. It takes mainly inspiration from this pursuit for knowledge, and it is a genre at the end of the day. Often refers to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Whenever people are talking about dark academia books in general, this is kind of like what people are referring to the most. If We Were Villains is actually a very similar book in terms of themes and styles and overall feeling. And when it comes to dressing like in the dark academia style, you are oftentimes aiming to dress like one of the characters in a book or the kind of student that would be reading this type of genre. Although dark academia is an online term that was coined, I believe it was in the Tumblr era. I think there is not an exact time and place when dark academia was considered coined. ID Vice does state that it is a subculture concerned with higher education, the arts, literature, or an idealized version thereof. When it comes to what is dark academia in terms of style and dress, it is oftentimes referring to the style of the late 18th century and early 19th century, specifically how college students dressed, or those who had scholarly pursuits or were in the arts, and oftentimes wearing pieces that were tailored or had a very structured look to them. However, when it comes to dark academia, when you wear it today, what you are essentially wearing is retro style and vintage fashion. And that is part of why I think dark academia is actually a timeless aesthetic and is not going anywhere, and can easily be implemented into your own personal aesthetic. On my channel, I actually do emphasize and prioritize your own personal style over anything else, and I have this strive for stepping away from these micro trends because those are ephemeral, and I want you to invest in pieces that are timeless and they're going to be with you for years on end, and that's what I aim for. And I feel like dark academia is one of those styles that does promote quality fabrics and timeless patterns and a color palette that you can take with you along your journey of life. When it comes to dark academia in terms of what it is as an internet genre and aesthetic, there are actually different subgenres when referring to dark academia. Dark academia at its core refers to color palettes that are browns, charcoals, and the literature that is associated with dark academia oftentimes refers to existentialism, tragic love, and other darker themes. There are lighter iterations of dark academia, which I'm not going to be discussing since my channel focuses on darker aesthetics, but there is light academia, which is beige, light colors, and oftentimes refers to themes that are a bit more optimistic and has this air of innocence. Green academia is somewhere between light and dark academia and has as mentioned, a greener color palette, but oftentimes deals with environmental and nature literature genres. Now there is darkest academia, which is a more intensified version of dark academia. It has a cooler color palette, whereas dark academia actually does lean a bit more on the warmer side due to the many browns that is often associated with this style. And when it comes to the literature, darkest academia is actually somewhere in between dark academia and gothic literature, where it deals with dark themes, but even more unsettling subjects, intense topics, and sometimes supernatural elements. When it comes to Gothic, which I'm not going to discuss too much in this video because I feel like Gothic literature inspired style needs its video on its own. It is the darkest colors, of course, but it is a broader genre in general and deals with melancholy and death. But what all of these styles have in common is that it is an aesthetic that focuses on literary, scholarly pursuits and oftentimes has this student-like look to it. Another thing to note is that dark academia offers a great alternative for those who prefer warmer tones or warmer color palettes or gold metal accessories. Oftentimes, dark aesthetics is associated with cooler tones and silver accessories. So dark academia is this great alternative where you don't have to sacrifice your love for gold jewelry or warmer color palettes, beiges and browns, and you can still participate in this style that still feels dark at its core. This is also a great alternative if you are a spring or a fall color season and you don't want to sacrifice stepping away from your color season if that's important to you. I personally like the dark academia style, and it is actually a style that I aimed to dress like for quite a while. And I actually found that I had a hard time dressing in a dark academia way. I would even go on Depop and try to buy one of those pre-made boxes, like curated boxes where you're like dark academia box, and they send you 5 garments that have to do with dark academia. And I'm gonna be quite honest, those never really worked out for me. I think it's so funny because when it comes to dark academia, it's actually something that you yourself can actually easily thrift or find vintage, because that is what dark academia is at the end of the day. It is this revival of vintage fashion that we saw in the early 19th century. And even though it does have this focus on what Ivy League students were dressing like, it was a very common way to dress during that time period in general. It has the tailored elements, it has these neutral color palettes and these collegiate patterns. Now, if you are looking for these online and let's say you're on Depop, Mercari, what are some keywords that you can use to find styles that are associated with dark academia? So you're looking for collegiate patterns, anything that looks academic, sometimes borderline uniform, but I don't want to say that too much just because that is an uncomfy topic. We don't want this to look like a complete copy of boarding school uniform. We want to have this emphasis that it is a collegiate style. It is scholarly, it is moody, and at the end of the day, it is vintage. So what you're looking for are certain basics that actually can read as dark academia, which are pea coats, trench coats, blazers, cable knit sweaters, pinafores, vests, sweater vests, plaid skirts, pleated skirts, plaid trousers, loafers, and should be in natural fibers. Now, this is not a must, but I will say when it comes to dressing in a dark academia style that feels true to this style, and you want that vintage look, and you don't want it to look too modern. I argue that when it starts to look too modern, it starts to stray away from this dark academia look. So look for these styles in cottons, wool, tweed, and knit. And the patterns that you're looking for are plaids. Now, plaid is actually a generalized term that refers to any crisscross pattern, and a tartan is a very specific type of plaid and is often associated what we see in Scottish culture. You also have stripes, pinstripes, houndstooth, chevron, and argyle. I was aiming to dress in a dark academia way. Where I struggled was the color palette and the silhouette. But I find that whenever you actually find pieces in those specific patterns that I mentioned, it actually starts to lean in a dark academia way, even if you don't mean to. So if it doesn't feel dark academia enough, or it feels too modernized, I feel like that's when it starts to stray away from the style and it becomes something a bit like it's not at dark academia. What you're looking for is tailored patterns, and neutral colors. Now, how does Dark Academia fit into the different Dark Muses? The Dark Muses is, like I mentioned earlier in the video, that it is a series where I talk about if you want to have a dark aesthetic, aim for one of these 5 ethereal entities, and you will automatically have a darker look. Dark Academia kind of teeter-totters between a preppy style. Preppy is, or old money look, or the old money aesthetic, and Dark Academia is its own entity, and it is essentially a subgenre of different dark aesthetics. So to avoid Dark Academia feeling too preppy or old money aesthetic, maybe try to go for a Vampire Academia style. Vampire Academia style is going to be like the Darkest Academia, where it is these blacks, charcoals, much more cooler tones, but to have it feel a bit more vampiric, you can have pops of red. I also feel like whenever I talk about vampire styles in my other videos, I always talk about red lips as kind of a must, but in different ways. And if you're going for a Dark Academia style that is vampiric, go for this rusty red lip look. Girl Cult has actually this beautiful brown red that actually would fit this perfectly. It's also sharp collars. When it comes to the vampire style and Dark Academia, they actually fit so well together that it is effortless. The sharp collars that are associated with vampiric styles is automatically going to feel Dark Academia. I think high collars is automatically vampiric and Dark Academia as well. But what makes it feel vampiric versus anything else is long silhouettes. So this is not exactly the style that would have the short plaid skirts. This is long, dramatic details. And the sleeves, think bishop sleeves, puffy sleeves, things that feel dramatic and rich. My online mutual Dracuel is actually a perfect example of this Dark Academia look mixed with the vampiric muse. Dracuel actually does take a lot of inspiration from vampire media and Gothic literature, but her color palette actually is in the Dark Academia realm. So I feel like her channel, her style, on her YouTube and Instagram is great inspiration if you want to mix the vampire muse with Dark Academia style. I feel like the brand Blackwood Castle is also where you can find these silhouettes if you are having a hard time finding them vintage or secondhand. Now, when it comes to the Witch Muse, the Witch Muse has an emphasis on natural fibers, which already goes well with Dark Academia, like I mentioned in the basics part. The Witch Academia, though, is going to be kind of like a looser, flowier version of vampire, but a bit more structured than what I normally would recommend for a traditional witch aesthetic. Witch Academia is going to be dark neutrals, naturally, but we have elements such as talismans, like this necklace that I have pictured here from Thorn and Claw. We want to envision this style as a witch or warlock who is at school and is pursuing a scholarly education. Was that right? Has scholarly pursuits. They have flowy skirts and trousers, so think like long pleated skirts or skirts that have a bit more movement in them. This is, again, a more relaxed version of the vampire. So I actually think garments such as capes, swing coats, wider necked pieces, and button-ups that are a bit less tight is going to fit this witch style. I think green plaids and velvets also still feel very occult and witchy, like in the movie The Craft, maybe American Horror Story Coven. The Instagram content creator Segovia Emil is also a great inspiration for this, and like I mentioned, the brand Thorn and Claw is a great witch inspiration in general. Siren Academia is actually an interesting one. I actually envisioned the styles shown in Queen's Gambit, which takes place in the 1950s as well as the 1960s. Anya Taylor-Joy's style actually fits this scholarly look that is associated with Dark Academia, but still also feels very Siren-like. The Siren style is going to be beige, neutrals, navies, but still have blacks and charcoals of your choice. But to make it a bit more academia, we can envision these long skirts and silhouettes. If you're going for a Siren Academia look, you're gonna probably tone back the patterns and focus more on textures, colors, and like the fabrication of it. So to mimic the pearlescent details that is often associated with Siren, you can think of satin blouses that are paired with long wool skirts and maybe a knee-high leather boot. Like that is the quintessential Siren Academia look. So again, Queen's Gambit, not all of her styles, but definitely some of like the knitwear and the sleek turtlenecks that she wears are great examples. And again, Blackwood Castle also is a great place to shop for in terms of silhouettes that feel dark academia but have these very sensual look that is very mature. When it comes to dark academia and the haunted doll look, they actually go hand in hand together. The haunted doll actually just has a bit more of an emphasis on the feminine details and a bit more frills and more dramatic details. And this almost is like going to be a bit light academia with a bit more uncanny valley and sinister elements. A haunted doll mixed with dark academia. Again, remember your muse is a haunted doll, a possessed doll. So there's going to be some unsettling elements about this with the addition of the academia look. Uncanny valley, so it could be in the makeup, it could be maybe a baby doll necklace, something that is a bit unexpected and pokes fun. That's why I love the haunted doll aesthetic. It is unexpectedly dark. This is a toned down version of the haunted doll. When it comes to the haunted doll aesthetic, I picture baby doll dresses, a lot of frills and details, but to make it dark academia, you just tone it down just a little bit. So it could be in the neutral tones, maybe adding a bit more browns, or just a little less frills and volume. I think clown-like details is actually a great way to have this mix of haunted doll and academia. The image that's in between the baby doll dress and the book Babel, she is wearing what is like a quintessential dark academia outfit, but she has this oversized ribbon necktie, and if you look closely, she actually has subtle clown makeup. In many ways, I feel like a dark academia look and haunted doll is just academia, but more emphasized, a bit more dramatic and exaggerated. So if you take a skirt that is typically dark academia, you make it poofier. If you have loafers that are dark academia, make it bigger. Maybe add an unexpected ribbon, maybe add a bit more frills and details. And I also think of some of the Victorian inspirations that were seen in the series of Unfortunate Events. And I do have Evelyn from The Mummy. I don't think she's entirely haunted doll, but in many ways I feel like her eyebrows and her fun soft hair actually feels like this could be haunted doll elements incorporated into this. Additionally, I feel like the brand Petals and Poison is a great place to go to if you like this dark academia look mixed with the haunted doll aesthetic. Petals and Poison definitely pushes this like tea party but with a darker element to it type of style, and they have these little trinkets that I feel like would appeal to those who like the dark academia style but also the haunted doll look, where it's playful, has this little air of innocence, but is a bit on the darker side. I also think Loud Bodies is a great alternative to the brand Selkie. If you like the baby doll silhouette of Selkie, Loud Bodies is another brand that has this very frilly-like silhouette that may appeal to you, and you can take some of these dresses and implement it into your haunted doll look. Fairy Academia. This was a bit tough because fairy style mixed with dark academia can easily make its way into becoming something completely different, and it's just not dark academia at all and defeats the whole purpose of this video. However, there are some interesting ways to mix the dark fairy muse that I have been discussing in this whole series with a dark academia look. So unlike the other muses, fairy is going to be the most colorful, and that almost contradicts dark academia in many ways, because once you start to add color to dark academia, like I mentioned, it does tend to look a bit like something else. However, there are ways to make it feel like a twisted fairy tale, like I mentioned is the dark muse at its core. So you can do earthy colors but have these pops of colorful details like we see in this vest. Picture Alice in Wonderland, picture the Mad Hatter, where you have these exaggerated silhouettes and fun details. And remember, fairy at its core is mixing patterns, and you can still mix these tartans and plaids and stripes, but in a neutral color palette. Or you can wear the traditional loafers of a dark academia look, but have a pop of color in argyle socks. It's taking dark academia elements and having fun with it and twisting it, just like what the fairy look is at its core. It's like a fairy tale, but that has a bit unexpected details, and again, like a twisted fairy tale. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the little details and building your basics. So what are some little details to account for when building your dark academia look? In addition to the basics that I mentioned earlier, you can get into the mood of this style in other things as well. Dark academia perfume has been a thing for a while, and oftentimes it is associated with paper or library-themed perfumes. Diptyque's perfume is often associated with the smell of a book. Whispers in the Library by Margiela is also associated with that musky smell of a library. And there are also many other library-associated scents. I also think when it comes to a dark academia look that looks like the late 18th century and early 19th century is things that are personalized and monogrammed. Think Louise Carmen journals, which, by the way, you don't have to spend $200 on a journal to get this look. At the end of the day, this is a traveler's notebook, and you can find many dupes on Etsy, and some of these artisans are also willing to personalize it yourself, or you can buy a hot leather stamp and make it your own. You can also monogram and embroider your coats, your cardigans. These little details that feel a bit more personal tend to have this vintage look to them, which inherently is going to feel dark academia, especially if you take it in a darker, moodier color palette. At the end of the day, you want this to feel vintage. The more modern it starts to feel, the more it starts to feel like something else. And lastly, maybe actually read the books. When you get into the mood, you read The Secret History or If We Were Villains or other dark academia books. It inspires you and feel more immersed in this style. And as you can see, I'm wearing a harness with my collared shirt that I thrifted. And I feel like when it comes to dark academia, the reason why some of us who have an affinity for darker styles stray away from the dark academia look is that it doesn't have this dark or sharp look like other darker aesthetics have, but we still have this fascination with the dark academia look. And I feel like if you want dark academia to feel a bit darker, a bit more, I hate using this word, but edgier, I feel like adding a harness to your traditionally scholarly looks is a great way to add that extra oomph to your dark academia look. So the harness that I'm wearing is from Jenny Machete, and adding a harness like this to a blazer or to a button-up is a great way to sharpen up an outfit. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are a Patreon member, dollar tier and up, everything that you see here is going to be condensed into a fun little PDF for you to reference at the end of this video, kind of like after show notes. I also use my Patreon to give announcements, kind of keep you guys up to date on my life, and also whenever I'm at a loss for inspiration of what to make next, I reference my Patreon members first. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you enjoy this Dark Muse continuation. It definitely is going to continue, and I am currently working on a perfume video and how the Dark Muses are associated with certain perfume scents. Until next time, bye.